As men, especially as doctors, sometimes we hyper-focus on our career, neglecting other facets of our lives. But that is about to change. This is Dads Before Doctors. Some physicians claim their family is their top priority, but their lives tell a very different story. We'll help each other become family men who are doctors rather than doctors who have families. If it's health, wealth and legacy, emotional well-being, parenting, professional goals, or marriage, we're talking about it. Thanks for listening, and make sure to subscribe. This is Dads Before Doctors, and this is your host, Adam Broussard, MD.
All right, welcome back to Dads Before Doctors podcast. Today, our guest is Mr. Blake Brewer. Welcome, Blake. Really happy to have you. I think this will be an awesome call. It will be really impactful for a lot of the dads listening. Can you tell us just a little bit about your story growing up in your family?
Yeah. Well, Adam, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and, share my story and share about my mission. But I did grow up, you're down there in South Louisiana in New Orleans. One thing we have in common is that we are both Saints fans from my mother's womb. I tell people I was a Saints fan. I was born up in Shreveport and North Louisiana, which is way different than South Louisiana. And I grew up with mom and a dad and a sister and a brother, and had a very traditional upbringing and went to church every Sunday morning, and I had a pretty positive experience growing up.
It's awesome. We actually have pictures. My grandfather used to work downtown New Orleans and has pictures from his office of them building the Superdome.
Wow.
Unfortunately, he passed away right before I was born, but my dad still has them. It's pretty cool.
Dude, well, we've been through a lot of bad years as Saints fans, and then growing up.
Absolutely.
And then when they got good with Drew Brees and Sean Payton, that was fun.
Yeah, maybe Joel will come back like Tom Brady yesterday.
I don't think so. Not gonna happen.
All right. Well, what does it mean to you to be a great dad?
Man, there's so many things I'm thinking through when you ask that question, but ultimately I want to provide for my children. I want to protect my children. I want to train up my children. I want to be present for my children. I just want to be there for them. And a lot of it is, how my dad was with me. But also just knowing that my children will be more successful in life with me there and be involved. And so I want to give them the words that they need from their dad, and that will help them be confident and successful and really reach their full potential in life.
How many kids do you have?
So I have three. I've got a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old. Yeah. And so every night they're like, "Daddy, are we gonna, instead of wrestling?" I don't know why they do this. They call it rascaling. And they said, "Dad, are we gonna rascal tonight?" And we put the pillows down on the living room floor, like the couch pillows, and man, I just throw them around, and they love it.
I have a 4-year-old and a 1.5-year-old, and the 1.5-year-old for Christmas got like this padded play area type thing called a nugget, and they can
we have that. Yeah, we have that.
Make it into all different things, but every night before bed, that's what they do. They're all over it, building different things and then tackling each other on it. So, well,
and the thing, I mean, you do the research on it, and it says like one of the best things we can do as dads is just to like wrestle with our children, and that physical touch, and just it's fun, but there is like it's good for them. It's good for us too.
So you're the founder of the Legacy Letter Challenge. Can you tell us a little bit more about what inspired your story and then what inspired that?
Yeah, I'm on a mission to help 1 million dads write at least one well-written, meaningful, lasting legacy letter to their children. I do this full time. I could have never in a million years dreamed that this would be my business and be my calling in life. But since I was 19 years old, I've had a letter from my dad that really has been my story and really impacted my life. And so my story is that we were on a vacation in Hawaii with our family. I just finished my freshman year of college. And my dad and I were out snorkeling in the water. And man, it was literally one of the best moments of my life. My dad had just told me, like, hey, I'm so glad that you're out here with me. And we're looking at the fish and saw a sea turtle. But we ended up in an area that I now know is called Witch's Brew. And the water had gotten really treacherous. And so I found myself not knowing where my dad was. And I started scanning the water and I saw him. And my dad I could tell he was struggling, and then he started to yell for help. And so my dad had this really deep, booming voice. He was a big guy. He actually played college football at Louisiana Tech. He was Terry Bradshaw's tight end, and then was actually drafted by the Falcons, and then was on the Saints for just a quick second, and then got hurt. But that was my dad, and he had this deep booming voice, but when he cried for help, it was more like a whimper. And so I knew that he was in trouble. And so I swam to him as fast as I could. And by the time I got to my dad, he was underneath the water, unconscious. And so I put my arms around my dad and started to swim with him to shore, and ended up getting him to shore. Luckily, there were some people that showed up to help me, because to be honest, I probably would have drowned myself. And they started doing CPR to my dad. And I was next to my dad, really just looking up to the heavens and just crying out to God, God, would you please save my dad's life? And I knew that surely at any moment it was going to be like the movies, where his eyes suddenly open up and the water starts to gurgle out of his mouth. But it never happened. And so my dad ended up drowning. And as you can imagine, I was, I was in total shock. It was like, what the heck just happened? And a couple hours later, we're back in the condo, and I'm at the edge of the bed. I'm still in total shock. I'm devastated. And my mom appears in the doorway, and she said, I found something in your dad's briefcase that he was going to give you on this trip. I had no idea what it was, but she walked across the room and put into my hand several sheets of paper. And at the top, it said, Dear Blake, Natalie, and Marcus, my sister and brother's name. And she said, for the last 2 months, your dad has been writing a letter to you guys, and he was going to give it to you on this trip. Here's your copy. And so my dad, when he was writing that letter, he didn't know it, but he was his last words to us. And that letter, he shared with us his heart, shared with us his feelings, gave us some good, just life advice. The last line of this letter, I believe only God could have allowed my dad to write this, but he said, the last line he said, as you follow God, you're often going to find yourself in the minority here on this earth. But I can assure you that in heaven, you'll be in the majority. Love your dear old dad. And I needed that right at that moment. I was just like, man, my dad is in heaven right now. And so for the next year of my life, as I went back to college, I was grieving so hard, but I had hope from my dad's words, like, I'm going to get through this. And then as I graduated college, started my career, and then had a family, there was my dad's letter and his words to me, like continuing to guide me as I entered in new phases of my life. And then it was a couple of years ago that I sat down to write a letter to my children, which, if anyone knows the value of a letter from their dad, it's me. And I, number one, I don't know when my last day on this planet's going to be. So I want to make sure and have something written down to them. But number two, I see the world that they're growing up in, and there's a lot of voices that are coming into my children's life. And it's very noisy out there. And I want to be very clear with them about how I feel about them, the values of our family. And so I want to write something. But then as I was writing this letter, it was really hard to write it and get my thoughts organized. And I couldn't finish it. It just kept hanging over my head. And at the exact same time, God kept bringing these men into my life that had just happened to have this story of a letter from their dad that changed their life. And then finally I was like, I get it. My calling is to help more people get a letter from their dad, and to be the one that actually helped the dads write this letter. And so that was how the Legacy Letter Challenge started.
That's wonderful, Blake. And I really, want to express my gratitude for you telling that story. I've heard your story multiple times, and I still get goosebumps and chills from hearing it. And truly, there was something divine out there that had him write that for you then, and at that time. Um, and going through such a difficult experience at a young age, having that letter to help carry you through. I'm sure there's other guys that are going through other difficult things. What kind of advice would you give them? Like, you could have just shut down. Like, what other advice could you give guys in that same situation?
Well, I can only speak to my situation. I really had to wrestle with a few things. I could have easily felt a lot of guilt. If I hadn't gone out there with my dad, we wouldn't have gone so far out. Or maybe, is there something I could have swam with my dad differently to keep his head more above the water, and maybe he would have survived. And those are things that I, thought through for the next, especially that next year. But honestly, I never really felt like that guilt, like that some people feel. I think part of it was my dad's letter, and just ultimately knowing that God is in control, and that even in the midst of like this very painful thing in my life, that there is going to be good that comes from it. And also my dad, it would have wrecked my dad if he knew that like messed up my life to the point where like I couldn't function or couldn't do anything, or and so honestly, part of it was to honor my dad, was to honor his legacy. I wanted to live a life that was purposeful, and that would make my dad proud. And so, through that, I was not afraid. I knew it would be valuable for me to like really experience the grieving process. Like, I had enough people in my life that were telling me this, and, it's okay to grieve, and part of it too is just talking to people. And so I found a lot of value, as hard as it was at times, to just talk about it and talk about my dad, talk about the situation, whether it was family or friends. I did go to a counselor for a little bit. But yeah, I think really just like letting that grieving process happen and not trying to stuff it in.
So you mentioned earlier about all the different voices that our kids are seeing, through internet, school, otherwise. I mean, there's whole companies devoted to making sure that they're filling their heads with something else, and that really, having that letter from your father, from your parents, like, is, I think, huge. And when it's not you like fussing at them, or just general parenting, just general daily stuff, like having that special thing.
Yeah, well, it's scary to think about. If we think back for most of human history, or even 100 years ago, like the number of people that were speaking into a child's life or a person's life, like how it's like your close family and maybe this close community. And now our children can get online and get on social media, and within 10 minutes can hear more opinions about how to live life, within 10 minutes than, a person 100 years ago would have heard in their whole life. And so that's, as a dad, that's who we're competing with. We're competing with all of that. And so I tell dads, we can't just throw our hands up in the air and say, well, there's too much competition. It's too hard. I guess, I guess I'm not even going to try. It's like, no, we got to double down, because we know that the most important voice in our children's life is ours. And it's me and my wife's. And so I've got to do whatever it takes to get my voice into their life, as our children are trying to figure out who they are, and figure out what is true of them, and what is true of life, and how to make decisions. And, I tell dads, it doesn't matter how old your child is, whether they're a newborn or, especially like if they're getting to teenage years, or even if they're 40 years old, Like they have decisions that are coming up in the near future, whether big decisions, small decisions, and the world is screaming at them, hey, come do it this way, make a decision this way. And it's like, no, they need our voice in their mind as they go to make those decisions, say, no, this is how you make that decision, or this is what you should do. And so, yeah, I think writing a letter is one way, and I think one of the best ways to compete with the world and to get our voice into our children's life.
So, as always, with things that are important, sometimes it's tough to, like you mentioned, get it actually started and get it down in writing, and not, want it to be complete perfection before you give it. How and when would you suggest starting this process? Is like, my kids are 4 and 1.5. They can't read. They don't like, when do you suggest?
Well, I tell dads the best day to write a letter to your children is the day that they're born. And the second best day is now. But really, one, we've got to get something written down because we don't know when our last day is going to be. I mean, and I think we all experienced that this past year with COVID. And, I knew some people that were on their deathbed. They ended up surviving, but they thought, man, this might be it. And what were they doing? They were pulling out some pieces of paper and they're writing some stuff down for their kids. So yeah, we've got to have something written down for our children that they can hold on to for the rest of their life. But then, going to your point, you may not give this letter to your children right now. I do encourage, some dads think, okay, I'm writing this letter for when I die. And I tell dad, hey, it's your letter. You can give it to them when you want. But man, this letter is so powerful that I recommend giving it sooner rather than later, so you can let it go to work. So I did. I gave my letter to my daughter when I think she just turned 5. And I was like, man, I'm going to go ahead and read this to her. And so we were sitting down at night, and I was, usually I read her books at night. And I said, hey, Grace Kate, I got something for you tonight. I'm going to read it. So I'm reading this to her. And man, I put my heart and soul into this letter. And so I'm getting emotional just reading the letter to her. And I'm just wondering, man, what does she even think? Could she even understand what I'm saying right now? Like, what is she thinking? And we get to the end of this letter, and I finish, and my daughter looks at me and says, Daddy, can we read the princess book now? And I just started laughing. But then the next day she did go up to my wife and she said, Mommy, last night Daddy read me a message and I want him to read me that message again. And so she didn't get the specifics of some of the things I was saying to her, but she got the general idea, like, hey, Dad wrote me something. And so as she gets older, she'll understand more. There was a dad who just finished his letter, and he sent me a message. Like, I gave it to my daughters, and she was about 12, and she was trying to understand, like, Dad, like how long have you been writing this letter? And he's like, well, I went through a program that helped me write this letter, and I've been working on it really the last month or two. And she looked at him and just said, you spent the last month or so writing a letter to me? And he said, yeah. And she, like, you could just see her heart, like in that moment, like, Dad, you care about me, and he has customers and clients that he spends time, trying to connect with. And this, what I tell dads is, man, we spend a lot of time with, like, in your, like, patients, and, if you're a doctor or, in business, and you're really trying to connect with whoever you do business with. But man, none of us want to get to the end and say, shoot, I connected with all those people, but I didn't connect with my own children. And so our children, they get it. When we do that extra work to try to connect with them, man, it speaks volumes.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the goal of the podcast and Dads for Doctors, just trying to take that step back from, just being so focused on medicine, and explore those relationships with our spouses, our kids, our parents, ourselves even. Like, we were talking before about, we've all been so focused on becoming physicians that, a lot of us haven't really explored ourselves outside of medicine. There was something that I've come to realize recently, that just like, I don't know what I like outside of medicine, because I've been too
your
busy.
life.
Yeah, that has been my life. So, I think that's a powerful story, for the child reason.
I was speaking this past weekend to a group of dads, and there were some doctors in the room, and there were some business owners and some military guys, and I told them, and really I tell this all the dads, is, as we all have different families, we grew up differently, our families are different now, we all have different professions. One of the things that we have in common is that when we get to the end of our life, whenever that is, and we're looking back over our life, one of the things that we have in common is we're not going to want to regret the time that we could have invested with our family. And the thing that is all going to matter, the thing that's going to matter the most to us at the end, is our family. Mm-hmm. And so, like, for my dad, the moment, in his final moments of his life, he wasn't thinking about, oh man, I got drafted in the NFL, or my dad was actually the CEO of a hospital. He was thinking about his family, like the people he cared the most about. And that's going to be true for you. It's going to be true for me. Like, and so we don't want to have any regrets when it comes to that. We don't want to get 20 years from now, it's like, shoot, I missed it. Like, 'cause we can't get it back.
Time's one of the only things you can't create more of.
And it's hard in the moment, because we're, even though you and I are doing different things, like, man, we want to be successful in our careers, and we're also trying to provide for our family. And so it is so easy, like, to not enjoy the journey, but just to, like, one day, like right now, I'm planning of, I'm thinking about when my children 2 or 3 years from now, and maybe we have a little bit more finances and some trips we're going to go on, and, even about my business and some things I want to do. And it's like, you know what? I'm sitting here with dinner with my family right now, and my daughter's trying to show me this drawing that she did today. Like, I just need to enjoy this moment.
Yeah, I think we get stuck in, whether, as a physician or business person, whatever, that we're doing XYZ for our family, so we can provide for our family, so we can, take a trip, so we can do this, instead of actually just like enjoying the moment with our family in that time, rather than what we're going to do in the future or whatever. And
yeah, well, and some of it is just the culture that we grow up in. So compared to the rest of history, we are just a very self-centered, like, individualistic society. So it's all about you. Like, from when you and I were younger, it's all about us and, our career that we were going to have one day. And there's just not a lot of questions about, what kind of dad you're going to be or the family you're going to have. But for most of human history, like, you thought multi-generational, like, you thought about your grandparents, and you were thinking about your children, you're thinking about your family name. Like, you had to, you were going to carry on your family name with pride. So you were thinking about family, and it was more than just you, like, you were a part of this family team. And so that's just not the culture we grow up in. So it's very difficult, I think, when we become dads, when we've been conditioned our whole life. It's, it's about your career and who you're going to be. And then we have these children, and it's like, well, wait, I want to be a good dad too, but how do I reconcile this? Like, I've got my career, which is what I've been focused on my whole life, but now I've got my children too. And, how does all this work together? Like, how do I do both well?
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you go about writing this letter? How do you help, other guys get this on paper, since it is tough? Like, I've been trying to work on just like, Vivid Vision, the Cameron Harold's book. I've been working on that on my to-do list for a year. Like, how do you help actually get stuff on paper?
Yeah, it's hard to start like looking at a blank sheet of paper and say, okay, what am I going to put down on this paper? And so that's why I developed the 10 steps to writing the letter and really walk dads through it. And, sometimes I have the dads go through my online course, self-paced, and then I also do private groups. Like I lead guys on Zoom. But the first thing that I help dads think through is, or I tell them is to write a letter of this magnitude, let's get our heart and mind in the right spot to write this letter. And so we have some lessons to help dads evaluate just their mission for their family. I was helping some guys who were retired Delta Force guys a couple months ago. And one of the guys is the chief of staff for special operations at Fort Bragg currently. And so I told them the assignment for this week is to write down their mission statement for their family. Like, what do you want to be true of your family 10, 20, 30 years from now? Like, what are the core values for your family? And he looked at the group and said, guys, I am in the Army. Literally, we all are. I write a mission statement all the time for like everything I do, and I've never done it for my family. And the thing is that most of us have not done that. But, as you go to write this letter, it helps to think through like, hey, what am I trying to accomplish? Like, what do I want to be true of my family? And so, taking the time to think through that. And then I also help dads think through what they wish their dad would have said to them. And so when you start to think through what you wish your dad would have said to you, it helps you say, I'm going to make sure and say it to my children. And then and then there's a lesson on just unforgiveness. And so I tell dads, man, nobody would say, oh yeah, you need to get some unforgiveness in your life, but yet people walk around with it. But I tell them it's like a cancer. And it just eats away at you. And so if there's anyone you need to forgive, whether it's your dad, your mom, your spouse, a friend, or, a lot of people, it's themselves. And so they're just holding on to something from the past. And so, man, as we go to write this letter, let's just, forgive. And then we start writing the letter. And so there's some different sections of the letter that we work on, whether it's the advice section. So for that, I have dads think through, hey, if you're on your deathbed and you had 30 days to go, what is the advice that you're going to give your children? They have their whole life in front of them, whether they're a newborn or whether they're 30 years old, they have the rest of their life. What advice can you give your children to help them navigate life? Like, the top 4 or 5 pieces of advice. Well, you can imagine like what a good exercise that is to stop and think through for the dad. Like, oh yeah, what is my best advice? And so to think through, okay, yeah, this is what I want my children to know.
So do you recommend this letter being like continuously evolve, or would you write, as your kids grow, will you write a new letter or?
Yeah, I tell dads, my mission is to help dads write at least one. Mm-hmm. And there are definitely some dads who, okay, I'm going to do this every year. And, they might use the word update or write a new letter. I think a lot of dads, at least around as their children hit different milestones. So maybe as they hit a teenager or, maybe driving or maybe high school or graduating from high school. Because as my children get older, I'm going to know them better and I'm going to know we're going to have more experiences. And so there'll be some new things that I want to put into the letter, or there's some advice that I'm like, maybe there's some things I'm learning right now. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm learning right now. This is what I'm going to share with my children. But 5 or 10 years from now, I'm like, oh, there might be some new things that I want to share with them, but it's still going to be pretty special for them to go back and read. Okay, this is how my dad felt about me when I was a toddler. Or like I helped a dad recently help write it to his newborn. And of course he doesn't know his like the personality or anything that his newborn's going to have. But how special is that this kid, as he grows up, is going to see that his dad loved him and was proud of him even before he had done anything in this world. He just loved him for who he was. And that kid's going to carry that with him for the rest of his life.
So anything that moms can do?
Yeah. So, my mission is to help dads write the letter, but I did create a program to help moms write their letter as well. And part of that, that was my plan all along to get to that. But as I started partnering with businesses who buy my program for their employees, or a lot of financial advisors buy it for their clients, they're like, man, you got to help us out. If we buy something for the dads, we got to have something for the moms too. I was like, well, absolutely. Which I have a great mom and two amazing grandmothers who really were strong ladies and spoke into my life. And, one of the things that my mom told me several different times was, Blake, I don't know what you're going to do, but I know you're going to be very successful at it. And she didn't, it's like, oh yeah, that's my mom talking. The thing is, like, she really believed it. And so there's been moments in my life where I'm like, man, like, what am I doing here? And then I hear in the back of my head, like, oh, I don't know, but my mom said I'm going to be successful, so I'm going to keep going. And she really believed it, right? And so our words, again, are so powerful. And so, yeah, we have a program to help moms write their letter as well. It's similar to the dads, but there's also some things in there to help. One of the things I've learned, and Adam, you may have not have heard of this, but there's a thing called mom guilt. And every mom I've talked to experiences this from the moment they get pregnant. Like, you just start, second guessing yourself, like, should I have done this? Should I have done that? And so I really try to help moms overcome any mom guilt and just be confident moms.
So I look forward to getting started on my legacy letter and connecting with you. How can the rest of the audience start the process and connect with you to begin writing their legacy letter?
Yeah, anyone can go to legacyletterchallenge.com. And there's several different options to sign up. But every month, I lead a group of dads through it. And so someone can join that, or they can just sign up and go through the online, like, self-guided version. And then, of course, if there's anyone who wants to do a program like for, like, in your situation, like all the doctors at the hospital, or, hospital staff, like, man, I would love to do a partnership like that. And I'm actually working on a deal right now with a hospital here in Tulsa to provide my program in the hospital for all the moms and dads who have a baby. And so, you're there for a couple of days, and then, while you're there, you can write this letter and go through my program, which I think is, pretty special.
That'd be awesome. We'll chat offline, maybe see if we can help with that. Any parting words to the listeners?
The most powerful voice on the planet is a dad's voice or a mom's voice. And whenever you put those words on paper, you increase the impact and you make it lasting. I have yet to meet a dad or a mom that has regretted taking the time to write this letter. It can be a little overwhelming to think through, okay, with life going on and everything else, but I try to make it as easy as possible and to make it as impactful as possible. And I promise you, no one will regret writing this letter. And actually, as far as my program specifically, I have a money back guarantee. If I don't help you write a better letter than what you would have written on your own, easily, man, money back. But I've helped people who are horrible writers, and I've helped authors write a letter. And so there's just something about having like a blueprint, like, to kind of guide you through it. So
yeah,
I would love for anyone listening, like, I'm on a mission to help 1 million dads write this letter. So if you want to be one of the million, let's go.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think having a guide, you can always get through it on your own, but having someone that has done it and been there and, helped others, having that mentor type thing is incredibly powerful, and it'll come out with a better product and probably a lot faster.
Yeah.
So, I really want to express my gratitude for you coming and sharing your story, incredibly impactful story. And hopefully we can have a huge impact on not only other fathers, mothers, and a whole generation of kids.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me, Adam.
You've been listening to the Dads Before Doctors podcast. Family men who are doctors rather than doctors who have families. In an evolving and ever fast-paced world, we cannot lose sight of our real priorities. We hope you enjoyed the show. We know we had fun. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And tell a friend about the show. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from the show. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at dadsbeforedoctors.com. Questions, comments, suggestions? Email adam@dadsbeforedoctors.com. And find us on Facebook and Instagram at Dads Before Doctors. Remember, the host of this show is not your doctor, your coach, or your financial advisor. This show is strictly for entertainment. Till next time, this is Dads Before Doctors, signing off.